from a boat on the random, and we will be talking about boats today. Finnish boats, to be exact. They were basically, looks like the Finnish Navy, basically, near Helsinki, had detected something big on the bottom, so to speak, and they didn't know what it was, so they had a suspicion that it was probably a submarine, a Soviet submarine. So to say hi to it, they were dropping basically deck charges by hand, not to damage the vessel, but just to basically let them know, hey, yeah, we know you're there, if that's what it was. The Russians have recently, got their newest and flagship. It's getting warm in here. One thing about a boat is always warm. Oh yeah, I'm probably gonna have a white butt sitting there. Oh well, whatever. Anyway, not too bad. But anyway, yeah, they've got their Yazan class submarine and their Bori class submarines. Now the Yazan class is basically an attack submarine, and this thing is armed to the teeth with like 40 cruise missiles. I forget how many torpedoes, probably, not quite as many torpedoes, but this would include probably the Shkval underwater torpedo, rocket torpedoes that go about 300 miles an hour. And this thing can do 40 knots underwater, and apparently it's one of the quietest submarines they've ever had, of course nuclear powered, and can dive up to or down to at least 600 meters. So that's a pretty impressive machine. Fast, stealthy, heavily armed. And if that's what is poking around, I can imagine the Russians would be testing these things. Technically, it was international waters, but then they, like the Swedes, they were basically searching for the Red October as well a few months ago. Again, these Russian submarines, who knows, maybe if it's the older ones, are probably easier to detect. But again, it's probing. It's to say, okay, well, if they can detect this, then we might have to try this. We might have to try this, see if we can get around. It's not how many times they detect stuff like that. It's how many things go by that they haven't detected. This is where, for example, last year, the year before, in the Gulf of Mexico, where they saw Russian Kula-2 submarines, at the time was their kind of flagship attack submarines, coming back on the surface. And in Hurricane Sandy, an Alpha sub, basically the predecessor to the Akula-2s, basically washed up during the storm and ended up in Norfolk. So you had a Russian nuclear attack sub in Norfolk getting repairs. So yeah, hello American friend, we were just spying on you in the water, and we have problem with reactor. We come to port, is okay. So, yeah. Yeah, we're friends this time. Yeah, okay. So anyway, that's kind of how it was, I guess. That said, with the everything going on, like around Venezuela and everything like that, well, then you still have that other problem too of, how many Russian submarines are still, really probing. You have to understand the American submarine fleet has been, and detection has been really gutted under the Obama administration. The Navy, mind you, it's not like they're not spending enough money on the military in the States. It's that it's where they spend it. So the Russians may actually have an upper hand there. They definitely have a huge submarine fleet. 60% of their Black Sea fleet is submarines, meaning out of the 200 warships or 240 warships, the numbers bounce around all the time. This goes into mothballs, that comes out of mothballs. This is new, that's old. Whatever, this replaces that. So those numbers are always driving around, but you're looking at between 200 and 240 vessels that the Russians typically keep in their Navy going. Now, they may step that up, considering world tensions. Who knows? Oh, my cat just about got a squirrel. What a racket that was. But that said, you could tell everybody in the region is, anybody sharing a border close to Russia is definitely nervous right now, especially over the Ukraine situation. But the thing is strategically, I don't think you could pick a country in a worse spot than Finland. They have nowhere to go if Russia, has a problem with them. And the Russia-Finnish ties, I'm not 100% on all the politics there, but I know it kind of banters back and forth. I know they definitely don't want to, tick off the big bear. And I know that, there's tensions there too. But the politicians are kind of flip-floppy because they don't know what to do. I mean, it's landlocked. You got Russia on the border, and then you got an ocean. Ukraine, at least people can, refugees can flee into Poland. They can go other places, and that type of thing. But with Finland, I mean, they're pretty much, here we are, here's Russia, and they're attached to us. It's kind of a worst case scenario for them strategically. That said, with Greenland, or not Greenland, Denmark considering to kind of be a NATO member, but not a full NATO member. The Russians have told them, hey, look, if you join NATO, you become targeted by our nuclear forces. That's kind of one of the things that their main mandate for the Russian military is to target NATO. Meaning, if you're part of NATO, it doesn't matter if you attacked us or not. It's the Article 5 thing. Attack against one is attack against all. But you got to understand, a retaliation against one is going to be a retaliation against all. So let's say the United States goes direct shooting war with Russia. Well, if you're part of NATO, even if you're not in on this fight, it's like, well, you're their ally. So this kind of makes you think of, again, the first Zeppelin raids in 1917, 1916, or whatever it was, where the von Zeppelin, the designer of the big Zeppelins, when these things were bombing, I forget the name, it was their best commander. He ended up dying in a Zeppelin anyway. But he viewed it as total war. He says, the guy in the factory building the tanks and the bombs and the artillery and the biplanes, well, he's a part of the war too. His family, that maybe his wife is a secretary for the recruitment center, well, she's a part of the war effort too. So it was total war. That's the way. So to his concept at that time, this changed warfare forever. It basically viewed the citizenry as enemy combatants as well as the military, and I'm sure Russia probably holds that today. So when you look at it like that, it's kind of like, okay, yeah, in this day and age, like you could see how, for example, drone strikes, if there's a terrorist in a supermarket somewhere and he just happens to be standing around 150 people, well, that hellfire is locked onto him, and you're considered collateral damage, because if you're that close to him, you're probably a part of the group anyway. Meanwhile, you're just shopping innocently in a market somewhere. You know what I mean? If you're a family member of a terrorist or something like that, again, there's no separation of the people versus. And if we look at any time in any world war or any major war in history, the unarmed civilians always take it the worst. They always take higher losses than the soldiers, because the soldiers can shoot back at each other, right? But when you look at even in the Ukraine right now, I mean, most of the people getting killed, a lot of them are civilians. Maybe not all of them, but you get an idea. A lot of them are civilians. And the displacement factor, you can use Libya as an example right now. Look at how many people just drowned last week trying to make it to Italy and Spain and stuff like that. Very, very tragic. But again, those countries, what are they going to do when they get them? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's tragedy, but what do? You're overwhelmed. You can't deal with them anyway. So now you've got all these refugees. You got over 1 million refugees in Syria, hundreds of thousands of refugees in the Ukraine, and no place to go. So what happens to these people? They typically usually starve to death is what happens. Or medical issues. The elderly, elderly people with medical issues aren't really meant to be traveling from refugee camp to refugee camp. They usually don't last long in those. Plus just the stress of having to live in a refugee camp. So when you're looking at it like that, you can see again, Finland's in a very tight spot. That said, more coming back towards the United States, the Jade Helm thing, again, there's a lot of things going on, a lot of different, nobody really knows exactly what it's for, because it can meet so many different requirements. But one thing that keeps getting said over and over, not just by the so-called conspiracy theorists, but the actual, ex-military law enforcement guys, they all say the same thing. They train mission specific. So if they're training for domestic civil unrest, the question is, what's it for? Is it for an economic collapse? Is there something? Is Yellowstone Park going to blow? Who knows? If that did, that's like the sixth extinction level event we'll witness on this planet. Well, we might not witness it because we won't be around to tell anybody about it because we got extinct in the process. So with that said, who knows exactly what it's for? But again, we look at Ferguson started up again in Boston, or Baltimore, sorry. You have the police that were out there a couple of days saying that, oh yeah, the Bloods and the Crips have teamed up together to target police officers. Now this comes out, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. There's, speculation on both sides whether it is or not. It doesn't really matter. Everything seems to go catastrophic at this point. And again, when we look at the same players on the TVs talking about the same things, it usually comes down to the same thing. It's always the same funding. Again, the George Soros groups and the Rothschildism and all that. They come along and they basically, hire all these provocateurs that go around basically busting things. So what was this for? Again, the links between the Walmarts and the DHS and Lockheed Martin and of course the Rothschilds and that type, because it's all, the corporations are all owned by the same people, right? Now you say, oh, it sounds like conspiracy, but it's not. I mean, there's a paper trail. There's a paper trail. Now that said, again, Walmart hasn't, from what I've heard, hasn't filed any work orders for plumbing, and yet they closed these 5 Walmarts down for plumbing issues, but there's no permits or nothing. So again, what's that all about? Who knows? Some people say there might be underground tunnels there. I don't know. I could see. You never know. It could be. They could have been built above missile silos. They would be completely untargetable. You know what I mean? Like nobody would know they're there. So your 450 U.S. missile launch sites that you have, yeah, Russia knows where those are, but I'm sure, there's probably like monuments and stuff like that that have that are actually, you're sitting there watching the monument one day and all of a sudden it just moves open and out comes a missile. You know what I mean? So what the heck? Yeah, who knows? But anyway, again, hiding it in plain view, but nobody would ever know. That there I don't have any proof of, but it makes sense. But there's other things. Baltimore, Ferguson, and where the Clive Bundy Ranch, again, have a link where there's, I think WW3 was talking about like 41 city, as like nation states type of thing with the cities. And he was saying that possibly these 3 are actually owned by corporations, and which would explain that all these events going on in those, again, all linked. Usually it always is. But again, what is, the state of emergency in Baltimore, a lot of people don't understand. State of emergency is the new term for martial law. When you have a curfew enforced by well, I guess in this case it's not the National Guard, but the State Guard, you have martial law. You know what I mean? Like, okay, they don't call it martial law, so it's not martial law. But no, if you get caught out on the streets with these people, you're going to get arrested, right? So, and the thing is that, again, the agent provocateurs, so to speak, the ones throwing the Molotov cocktails, getting the monkey see, monkey do things going, again, these people seem to be the same ones that showed up in Ferguson, that type of thing. So the United States is getting ready to lock down the country. It pretty much has 17 mandates of martial law that are already in play, searches everywhere, TSA, that type of thing. And there's a reason why they're doing this. The exact reason is not known, but there's a lot of reasons why they're doing this. So, and it's multifaceted. Again, if there's a massive environmental problem, say food shortage due to drought, you've got your martial law guys right where they need to be. If there's an invasion, a Red Dawn style invasion coming up from South America, from Venezuela, Russia, China, North Korea coming in, or even Al Qaeda or ISIS or whichever U.S. puppet out there. Again, it still works. If there's a civil uprising, red, blue, green lists, red, blue list, red, green, blue, or whatever that list is. They're kind of drawing a blank. It works for that. So again, we see, how's it really linked to the World War III stuff? Well, it is and it isn't. Again, if a major war were to just kick off magically this year sometime, again, everybody's in place that they need to be, where they need to be. So I guess with that, also too, the Mistral aircraft carrier that France was supposed to sell to Russia is now going to be purchased by Sweden, and I guess the United States has probably thrown some cash at that too to get them out of that agreement, which, France needs the money big time. So that's what I heard on that one. Next to that, your usual suspects in the Ukraine doing the usual things. Again, we've already covered that the new U.S. Have approved budget to upgrade the Stryker armored vehicles in the Ukraine to put the 30mm cannons on them rather than their 50 calibers. or maybe they had the 25 mil on their AMX. I don't know what they had on there. But anyway, they wanted, basically APC to APC kind of contact. But again, we have to ask the question, well, why would American APCs be coming up against, the Russian rebel ones, unless they're going over there? Because again, we look at where the fighting is. Next to that, they're spending, I forget how, a few $1,000,000 on this. Okay, this kind of goes back. There's a video I did a long time ago, right when this whole Ukraine crisis started. And I said there would be an East Ukraine and a West Ukraine. Now, has that happened yet? Well, actually, it kind of has now. They're now putting up a barbed wire fence. So this is, I guess, the Berlin Wall, first stage type of thing. They're putting basically to fence off the eastern side of the Ukraine. So you now have an East Ukraine, West Ukraine. Check. Again, I'm not tooting my own horn. I'm just saying, if you can't see the stuff coming, it's pretty predictable. And again, if you follow my channel, I usually call this stuff pretty right. Because again, Russia's not going to give up that side of the Ukraine. They could bleed this out for years. Meanwhile, the people in the Crimea apparently are enjoying a better quality of life than anybody else in the Ukraine right now, because Russia's throwing a lot of money at it. Again, they're bribing them, right? So, but that's all they had to do on the other side, is just outbribe the Russians. They could have done this. We're also seeing that with the debt charges, that again, the Finnish Navy doesn't know for sure if it was a Russian sub, but they suspect it was. I mean, if they're throwing debt charges handheld, they just look like riot grenades, and they just throw them in. You can do it with firecrackers. So you shoot one of those airbursts, you can shoot them in the water. They'll go down like 10 feet. No, make a boom. But these things will go a lot deeper. These are like kind of like concussion grenades, I guess you would say, for divers. And you throw them down, but it's just enough. You're doing two things. Number one, you're going to bounce sound off the object, whatever it is, and that's probably if you have your side scan sonar, or the military version of it, and the FLIR, and underwater. They've got all kinds of detection stuff. They'd probably actually be able to tell exactly which sub it is, or what type anyway, because the sound can actually create a pattern on the radar, and you can actually tell the shape of the thing. And they find human bodies like in rivers and lakes like this by bouncing sound, sonar back and forth. You could find people like in 1,000 feet of water, if they're looking for you. But the thing is, you have to be over the target. So easiest way to get over the target is bounce down until you can gauge the distance and see where it is. So that's what they're doing. So they did it more to scare away whatever it was, rather than actually go after. And because again, for the Finnish Navy to sink a Russian submarine would probably be bad for the Finns, because they're already in a bad spot to begin with. How they'll actually play out in World War II or World War III in an actual shooting war, I don't think they could actually get out of it if they wanted to. They're just in the place where either people are coming up from this side or coming out. They're going to be the battleground kind of area. Same way the Ukraine is. You're going to have U.S. and Russian troops in the Ukraine. Well, you already do. The only difference right now is the U.S. troops in Ukraine are overt. They're there. And the Russian troops are covert, where they're there in unofficial capacity, but you can't tell one, an actual resident who's defending his homeland versus, actual, Russian Spetsnaz who came in to train the guy. So you can't tell one from the other. So there's no good guys anywhere, right? And again, when we look at like Denmark, Norway had a scare recently because of one of their naval bases that they pretty much closed down. They're watching basically Russian warships just kind of cruise by, technically in international waters, but still. Here in Canada, they were talking about the Russians in the Arctic. I don't know what to make of the Arctic. I'm thinking it's going to start to close up again in the next couple of years. We'll probably see it wide open in the summer. It looks like there's nothing left, and all of a sudden, it all comes back. And then if it, I got a video coming on the 24th cycle, solar cycle, which means that the sun's less active. So who knows? We're going to be moving into a cold. It might not happen for a decade, who knows, but we're going to slowly start closing up that Arctic again. We've been melting since the last ice age, but we're also heading towards another ice age at some point. Maybe not in our lifetimes, maybe it might be tomorrow, you never know. And considering that the last ice age only came in or the last major ice age, the 10,000 year one, the one before that was 25,000 years, but the one that came in 10,000 years came in a 3-year span. I think we got gypped big time on that. It's like 3 years to get here, and you're going to stay for 10,000 years? What? That's horrible. That said, I don't know what else I got on that front. Japan, again, saber-rattling, trying to change the constitution so that they can, have a limited war with China. I don't know how these people even come up with this stuff. Like, it's like, war is war. Again, let's go back to the Zeppelin. You know, the Zeppelin. I mean, there it is. You got a city below you. Okay, well, we're only at partial war, so I'm only going to bomb the factories. And you're just going to open the doors, bombs away. Incidentally, just as a nothing of it, I'm going to do a thing on Zeppelins. I didn't know this, but it took 250,000 cow intestines to make the bladders for the big giant airships of the day. 250,000 cows per Zeppelin just to make the helium bladders. Isn't that crazy? But you didn't know that. Yeah, now you do. So next time you see a Zeppelin, it's like wow, that holy cows. You know? But anyway, yeah. But anyway, so I guess I'll leave it at that. We'll have to wait and see what happens with other things. The economy, who knows what's going to happen there. Again, everything is so manipulated that I don't see the economy, like I said and repeated, I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but that I don't think we're going to see an all-out collapse. We know everything is inflated, but the whole point is that everything is manipulated. Everything is completely manipulated, so that you know that because it's completely corrupt, that if it hasn't collapsed now, it's not going to collapse. But it doesn't mean people aren't noticing that they're starting to become gradually more poor. So they need to deflect the issue. And again, if you can make everything about a race issue or whatever, it gives justification. And if you can keep the martial law, small mini martial laws going up through the United States, and get people used to always being under a state of some form of martial law, which has been enacted since 2010 under the NDRP. If you're an American, you really need to. It's the largest land grab in history, and it's also the thing that enacted the draft and basically nationwide martial law. And the thing is people are saying, well, why do we need these Bearcats? Why do we need the militarization of the police? Well, you need incidents to if nothing's happening, you can't justify it, right? But if something's happening all the time, oh, these people are out of control. They think it's a race issue, but it's not. It's really justification for all this equipment for the DHS and stuff like that. And it's also gradually locking down the population. So if something gets out of control, the only people they're going to have to deal with is a handful of fringe elements, which when everybody else is complying to the martial law. Again, when Hitler took power, he didn't take power overnight. It took a while. Stalin wasn't a tyrant. He started off as a hero, to the Russians, you know what I mean? And then he became the tyrant. It doesn't happen overnight. It's gradual. It's like the frog in the pot theory, where you put a frog in a pot, you turn the stove on full, he'll just jump out, but if you turn it on slow, he'll boil slowly, not realize it. And that's kind of what's going on in the States and everywhere else in the world. As people start realizing that they're gradually becoming more poor. I mean, new things have come out now. Here in Canada, for example, the bank of mom and dad are pretty much officially closed. Parents can't bail out their kids anymore. And almost we have now one of the highest rates of people who don't think they're going to be able to retire fully by the time retirement age comes around. Just nobody has any, we're in too much debt, right? So there's some people out there who say, well, I can't wait till it all collapses. But the thing is the amount of death that comes out of it. If you know it's coming, you're still not going to be prepared for it. It's like war or anything. You're never going to be prepared for it, no matter how much you prepare for it. It's just, these are really horrible things we're talking about here. And we definitely don't want that. But doesn't mean you shouldn't prepare for it. Prepare for the worst, hope for the best. So I guess I'm going to leave it at that. Again, there's so many things to keep an eye on. But these incidents, like with the Finnish Navy dropping deck charges, in itself is not a big issue. But when you look at, again, if you've been following this channel for a long time, you realize the dots are connecting that. It's like an incident almost every other day now. I mean, it's really out of the norm. It's not the norm. We are, and plus in the United States, if you look at both sides want to go to war with Russia. They've pretty much openly said it. The lunacy is just beyond, like, the inmates are running the asylum at this point. So I guess I'm going to leave it at that. So if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation to the channel. Thank you very much to everybody who has. Rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Don't be afraid to use the comments. That's what they're there for. That's one of the greatest things about the channel, is that you get to, and YouTube in general, is that you get to, interact. Maybe there's things you agree with me on, or maybe there's something you thought I missed, or maybe you think I'm completely off my rocker. Whichever, throw it down below. I never censor my comments. I don't believe in that. I think everybody has a right to speak. Try to keep it civil if you can. I like things, getting sent links and stuff. Again, for the links, even if I can't get to them, don't be afraid to share them with everybody, because it's for everybody, right? I mean, the more informed, because I can't follow it all, and I don't think anybody can follow it all. But if the more data we have, the more better choices we can make for ourselves. When we know more, we can do more, right? Or be prepared for more. It's just, you can never know enough, right? So with that, you could also check out my WW3 Facebook page, WW3 Updates Facebook page, and my Not Reg Me, all one word, Twitter page is just me posting these videos there. I don't really actually do any real tweets there, but you could follow it too and share, use that and share it from your Twitter, or whatever you want to do. Next to that, rate, subscribe, definitely share, comment, like, be true to yourself, be true to others, always do the right thing. We're going to have another look at my yacht. And have yourselves a great day. And I got a nice shiny gleaming boat. I just cleaned it today. Yep. Okay, World War III update. Incidentally, coming to you from a boat on the random, and we will be talking about boats today. Finnish boats, to be exact. They were basically, looks like the Finnish Navy, basically, near Helsinki, had detected something big on the bottom, so to speak, and they didn't know what it was, so they had a suspicion that it was probably a submarine, a Soviet submarine. So to say hi to it, they were dropping basically deck charges by hand, not to damage the vessel, but just to basically let them know, hey, yeah, we know you're there, if that's what it was. The Russians have recently, got their newest and flagship, it's getting warm in here. One thing about a boat is always warm. Oh yeah, and probably gonna have a white butt sitting there. Oh well, whatever. Anyway, not too bad. But anyway, yeah, they've got their Yazan class submarine and their Bori class submarines. Now the Yazan class is basically an attack submarine, and this thing is armed to the teeth with like 40 cruise missiles. I forget how many torpedoes, probably, not quite as many torpedoes, but this would include probably the Shkval underwater torpedo, rocket torpedoes that go about 300 miles an hour. And this thing can do 40 knots underwater, and apparently it's one of the quietest submarines they've ever had, of course nuclear powered, and can dive up to or down to at least 600 meters. So that's a pretty impressive machine. Fast, stealthy, heavily armed. And if that's what is spoken around, I can imagine the Russians would be testing these things. Technically, it was international waters, but then they, like the Swedes, they were basically searching for the Red October as well. About a few months ago. Again, these Russian submarines, who knows, maybe if it's the older ones, are probably easier to detect. But again, it's probing. It's to say, okay, well, if they can detect this, then we might have to try this, see if we get around it. It's not how many times they detect stuff like that, it's how many things go by that they haven't detected. This is where, for example, last year, the year before, in the Gulf of Mexico, where they saw Russian Kula 2 submarines, at the time was their kind of flagship attack submarines, coming back on the surface. And in Hurricane Sandy, an Alpha sub, basically the predecessor to the Akula 2s, basically washed up during the storm and ended up in Norfolk. So you had a Russian nuclear attack sub in Norfolk getting repairs. I mean, so yeah, hello American friend, we were just spying on you in the water, and we have problem with reactor. We come to port, is okay. So, yeah. Yeah, we're friends this time. Yeah, okay. So anyway, that's kind of how it was, I guess. That said, with the everything going on like around Venezuela and everything like that, well, then you still have that other problem too of, how many Russian submarines are still, really probing. You have to understand the American submarine fleet has been, and detection has been really gutted under the Obama administration. The Navy, mind you, it's not like they're not spending enough money on the military in the States. It's that it's where they spend it. So the Russians may actually have an upper hand there. They definitely have a huge submarine fleet. 60% of their